All right, welcome back. We are going to get started today by looking at different ways to make timelines. So we're going to do 3 different timelines. The first 2 are going to be with female soccer goal scorers data in celebration of the Women's World Cup in 2019. And the last one is going to be a timeline of tweets that Donald Trump has sent, so his Twitter record. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is a super basic timeline. We are going to work with the top 17 female soccer goal scorers data set. This is actually a table that was pulled in from Wikipedia. And a quick note about this data. I want to show you how I got this. So here is a Wikipedia page talking about women footballers who have 100 or more international goals. And if we scroll down on this page, we see that there's a ton of statistics. There's the list of all of the female goal scorers with more than 100, and there's some other tables down here as well. I want this table. This is the data that I want to visualize. It gives me their active years, the number of goals that they've scored. Really useful information here. I could just copy and paste this and put it into an Excel file, but Google Sheets has this really amazing function, which is import HTML. So up here in cell A1, I've written import HTML. I've passed the address of that Wikipedia page. I've told it to look for a table. And I've said, hey, look for the second table. I picked the number 2 by strictly trial and error. There are better ways to do this, but quite honestly, trial and error is way faster than any of the more precise ways. So trial and error. And then it automatically loads this entire table for me. I can't change any of the data in here because it's being actively pulled from the internet. I can copy all of this and then paste it as values only, so paste special, which is actually how I got the data set that we're working with now. Because it's relatively small, I was able to just copy all of it and then paste it into an Excel file using the paste special function. Anyhow, just a really cool way to get data. Obviously, this one requires a little bit of data cleaning. It's a small enough file that you can clean it manually. You could also clean it programmatically by looking for these characters. All right, so we are going to return to our Tableau, our visualization set. So once you load that data set into here and pull sheet 1 over, you should see something very similar to this. The column I want you to look for is the date of 100th goal. Yours probably says string. You want to go ahead and change that to being a date, because ultimately we're going to want to parse that as a date rather than as like a static string. Now we are going to do something a little bit tricky. We are going to create a calculated field, and our calculated field is just going to be min 0. What this is just saying where the 0 point is. It's kind of a Tableau hack to create a 0 line when there's no data on your 0 line, and then use that for your timeline. And call this calculated field calc beginning. You can call it calc origin or whatever you want to. Go ahead and hit apply, and then you'll have a calc beginning that's just the 0 here. All right. The next thing that we want to do is go over to our sheet 1, and here we are going to drag our calc beginning over here to the rows. And this should give you a 0 line going all the way across. Use the drop-down menu here to make it a continuous variable. By default, it'll be discrete, but we want this to be continuous so that it creates a solid line for us. Your line is probably going to be dashed. That's okay. This is just some formatting that got it to be a solid line like this. Now, in order to display events on the timeline, we are going to drag the day of the date of the 100th goal. So the way you do this is drag date of 100th goal up here. And then here, we're going to go down into the second set of date time functions and specify the day here, because we want the day to be May 8th, 2015. We don't just want 8 for our date. We want the actual date that it was. By doing that, you should then get these spots here. Go ahead and drag the name to the detail, and when you do that, you'll get all of the dots along your timeline with the name and the date that they scored their goal. You probably want to increase the size to considerably larger than the default size, because really the default size is far too small to see on a timeline. All right, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to just add a little bit more information. It should say down here that there's 4 missing data points, and these 4 data points are here. And what's going on is 2 different things. So first, the dates are just unknown, so we've put an asterisk up here and an asterisk down here. The way that I got this was I clicked on one of these data points and then right-clicked and clicked annotate and said annotate this area. And this creates an annotation around the entire area. And then I formatted the lines to get rid of the little dotted line there. Drug it over to where I wanted it to appear. And there's actually a story going on with this data. Italy was playing football long before anybody else was, and these dates were just not recorded. Not totally sure why China's dates weren't recorded, but there's quite a bit more story here about the evolution of women's soccer that can be told just from these unknown dates, in addition to these known dates, right? All right, so once you do that, one more thing you might want to do is drag the date of the 100th goal over here to filters, because it's possible that you may want to filter down to only the last 5 years or something like that. Again, go down and select day. We're not actually going to filter on the dates, but if you wanted to, that's how you would do it there. I formatted the lines extensively, and I encourage you to do the same just by clicking format, and then your rows. I made the 0 line nice and huge. All right, so you should have a pretty good timeline here. Oh, I also formatted the y-axis, removed the 0 that was here, just because it's completely not informative. So I've done a few other things, like I've added the national team to the tooltips, formatted the tooltips a little bit, added a title up here, formatted the axes down here. All right, so this is the most basic form of a timeline that you can do in Tableau, and without too much work, it does pretty good. So now let's move on to making a Gantt chart. Now, the difference between a timeline and a Gantt chart is that a Gantt chart tells you the start and end of different events. Oftentimes, Gantt charts are used in project planning and things like that. For our purposes, we want to know when all of these players may have been playing with each other. We want to see things like Christine Lilly and Mia Hamm starting at the same time, even though Christine Lilly outlasted Mia Hamm. We want to see the fact that Sue Wen and Tiffany Milbrett were, working or playing around the same time. So that's the information that we get out of a Gantt chart, which is what makes it so different from a timeline, because your traditional timeline just puts points along a line. A Gantt chart, on the other hand, you can see these overlaps. But as with many of the more advanced visualizations, What we need to do here is work with our data quite a bit in order to get it into a format that Tableau can understand and do something with. Okay, so go back to your data source, and here we have the active years column. And this is ultimately what we're trying to make our visualization around. But our active years is not necessarily so helpful because it's just this like time range. So go ahead and split this column, and it should give you an automatic split that gives you two columns of numbers. So you'll have 2001, 2015. We're going to go ahead and change that into being a date because it's going to be a little bit easier to work with. And since there's no actual days or starting days, we're going to assume that everyone started on January 1st of that year. This is obviously wrong, but we're not necessarily looking to get an accurate measure of like how many days this player was playing on an international league. Rather, what we would just want to know is when people overlapped. And if they overlapped for any part of a year, then they overlapped. So by setting everybody to January 1st, we're not losing too much information because our goal is not specificity. All right, so once you have your split, go ahead and change it to a date on this one and change it to a date on the active years split too. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is calculate a duration column. So go ahead and here and click create a calculated field, and we're going to call our calculated field duration, and we're going to pass it the date diff. And what we're saying is calculate the difference between these two dates. We only want you to focus on the year. Don't worry at all about the days. And what I wanted to take is active year split 1 and then active years split 2. So how many years apart? Really quite straightforward here. It's just that because we have dates, we need to use date diff rather than normal direct subtraction. All right, so you'll have a duration column, and now we can go over to our sheet 2, and here we're going to take our active years split 1 and drag it up to the columns. Now, here in the columns, we're going to turn this into a continuous variable as well. Generally, when you're working with time data, you want to treat time data as a continuous variable. Even though we so often treat time as discrete, we treat it as these discrete units, Tableau understands time as continuous, as there can be an infinitely smaller number of pieces between this point and that point. So we want to make sure that we go down here and select continuous. Once you've set this up as being continuous, you need to come and select year in the first section because all that we're dealing with here is the year, and these are the ones that work better for what we're doing. Okay, so once you've selected year and continuous, you can go ahead and drag the name to the rows and drag the duration to the size. And this is how we get the bar lengths based on the duration of time. I've also added national team to the color and then did all of these custom colors in order to represent their flags. You do not have to do that, but it's a nice touch to say, you know, okay, each team has one of these colors in it. If you have too much to show, you can also drag the active years split 1 to your filters, and then go ahead and use your filters to like narrow down the range. Maybe you only want to see the people that played together from like 1985 to 2020 or something along those lines. All right, the last thing that we want to do here is we want to go up to name and sort. So here, if we go to sort, we want to sort on a field, and we're going to sort on the active years split 1, and we want the aggregation to be the minimum because we want to sort when they started playing. And that's how we get this nicely waterfall looking Gantt chart here. All right, aside from that, all you should have left to do is edit your axes, play with your colors, format your tooltips, and give it a title, and overall just tighten up this visualization. In the end, what comes out of all of this is I've made this dashboard that shows first the timeline of all of the players and shows the duration of their play together, as well as where the data came from. All right. I hope you enjoy working with both of these. You are welcome to use the top goal scorers. You are welcome to use any other data set that you like, but this is just a really nice data set to make a Gantt chart with. All right, I will see you over in the next tutorial, right after the end of this one, for how to make spiral timelines using Trump's tweets. All right, so we are going to turn our attention now to making a much different type of timeline. Just to give you a preview of what it's going to look like, we will have our timeline starting from the origin that then circles out. There is no particularly good reason to do this other than, well, no, there's two good reasons. First, it just looks kind of cool, and you can make a good point about like, you know, spirals and circles and patterns and things like that. The other reason to do this is that a lot of the calculations that we're going to do in order to get to this point are form the basis of the calculations we're going to need to do to make a nightingale rose. Now, in this class, we are not going to make a nightingale rose. It's also called a comb chart. It is too complicated, and you'll see why as we start going through this one. But this spiral timeline really gives you a sense of what you can do and what the possibilities are if you start becoming basically a power user of Tableau. All right, but the math for this one is heavy, and the math for a nightingale rose is even heavier, and that's why we're not gonna work out that one. Okay. All right, so we have over here 2 years of data from President Trump and the tweets that he has sent. So we've taken from January 1st, 2017 to December 31st of 2018. And we're plotting this in a spiral. We need to ask ourselves two things. First, we need to ask ourselves, how far through the year is any given day? How far through the year will help to determine the angle of the plot and how far around the circle we're going to plot the data. The second question is, how far away from the start is the record in particular, is the day in particular? So this determines the distance of the plot from the center. Without this, you can do the thought experiment that, let's say, we knew how deep into the day a given record was, how deep into the year a given record was, but we didn't know like how deep into the data set a given data point was. If we don't know how deep into the data set it is, we're just going to have a circle on top of itself over and over and over again. So we need to have both of these calculations in order to plot a spiral in this way. If what you're trying to show is cyclical things and you don't care about the year, you only care about, say, the months or the hour or whatever like that, then you don't need to worry about how deep into the data set. You just need to know how far around the circle, or in our case, how far through the year. Okay, this might seem a little abstract. Hopefully it'll become a little bit more concrete as we walk through it. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is calculate this day of the year. So we're going to create a calculated field, and you're going to call it calc day of year. We're going to use the date part function. which is a really cool function that you tell it what you want. I want day of the year. I pass it a date and it says, great, I know what day of the year that is. That's the first day of the year. That's the second day of the year. If you're talking about sometime in December, that's the 330-something day of the year. So what this gives you is how deep, how many days into the year your date is. Okay, so that's the first thing that we make. The next one that we're going to ask is to figure out how many days each datum is from the start of data collection. What this means is how deep into the data set is it? So not how deep into the year is it, but how deep into the data set is it? I have it calculated here already. I will show you a little bit what I mean by that. So I've reordered this. We're only seeing the first 1,000-day preview, so it actually, you can't see it very well. So never mind, not able to illustrate that point. All right, moving along. So we're going to create another calculated field. I'm going to call this calc total days. And I'm going to say, give me the year of the created at date minus 2017. 2017 being the first year of my data. Now, how did I know that? Well, I looked at my data. This is the type of visualization that you can't necessarily do until you've gone through, you've looked at your data, you know when that first year is. We're going to multiply this by 365, and then we're going to add the day of the year. So this gets how far together. This tells us how deep into the data set that it is. This is like, if it's year 1, this is going to be 0, and we will have like, I don't know, day 3 or whatever, January 3rd. Because if we had 2017 minus 2017 times 365, this gives us 0. If we have 2018 minus 2017 times 365, we've added 365 days plus however deep into the year we are. So if it's January 3rd of 2018, we get 368 from this formula. If it was 2019, this would be 2 times 365 plus however many days into 2019 we are. Now, really quick. So you may be thinking to yourself, but what about leap years? And I'm going to say, I don't care. So every 4 years we have a leap year. So like if there was a leap year in our data set, we should technically deal with that. But ultimately, I'm making a visualization to make a point. I'm not making a visualization for an analytic purpose. All right. So this gives us our total days for all the datum in our data set, for each datum in our data set. Okay, cool. So we are now going to use our total days to figure out the angle. Now, because we're working in a circle, we need to figure out how far along the circle, so how, at what angle is our data point going to be, because we're working in a circle like that. We may think in angles, but Tableau uses radians. If you don't remember your middle school, high school, early college math classes, don't worry. You don't need to know much about radians other than the fact that they are 2 times pi of your angle. That's all you actually need to know. Anytime you need to use radians, or anytime you're trying to translate angles in degrees to something that Tableau understands, just multiply by 2 times pi. All right. So we know that each day is 1 out of 365, 1/365th of the way around a circle. So I'm going to create another calculated field, and I'm going to call it angle. And this calculated field is going to be the total number of days divided by 365 times 2 pi. And this is the radians conversion. And what I'm saying here is that like sometime in June will be like 180-ish days over 365, right? So it'll be halfway around the circle. So we have how far around the circle, and then multiply that by 2 pi. This is true both for a spiral timeline, and it's the same kind of calculation, the same kind of conversion that you end up using for a Nightingale rose or a comb chart. Okay, so it's this, I've made it, halfway around the circle, and I'm going to multiply that halfway times 2 pi. And that's really all that you need to know about this. If you're really curious about it, we can talk about the trigonometry behind it. Okay, cool. So we have our angle here. We are so close. So we are going to use a little bit more trigonometry. We're going to make our x and our y. So I'm going to make another calculated field. When I got my angle, what I was getting was how far around the circle it's going to be. Now I'm translating that into a x and y coordinate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take for my x the total days times the cosine of the angle I just calculated. Now, if you don't remember your trigonometry, that is totally fine. You have to calculate the x with the cosine, y with the sine. It actually doesn't even matter if you flip those. All that you need to know is that this is how we get the x coordinate, is by multiplying by the cosine. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and apply that. And we're going to do the same for our y. We're going to, as you see, I have something slightly different here. We are going to multiply the total days by the sine of the angle. Go ahead over to your sheet 1, and now we're going to make our spiral. So go ahead and drag the calc x to the columns, the calc y to the rows. You can also flip them if you want your spiral to be going the other way. It really does not matter. Just drag one to one and one to the other. And then drag the text over here to the detail. And that's how you'll get this spiral going on. Now, if you want to size them, you can drag the favorite count or the retweet count over to the size. You can drag the source to the color. Really interesting. Trump had an Android phone for the first 3 months of his presidency that had no security settings on it. And then he got a new iPhone with lots of security settings, as you can see. Go ahead and change the size. You can adjust the color based on the source that it's coming from. But what we see here is a spiral that is possibly a little bit too tight for our liking. We might want the center of our spiral to be spread out a little bit more so that we can see these green points a little bit better. Right now they're really smushed together, and we'd like to extend them a little bit more so that we can see the things at the center a little bit more clearly. All right. The way that we do that is by setting parameters. So I'm going to go here just as if I was going to create a calculated field. But instead of creating a calculated field, I'm going to create a parameter. So if I come, you should get a pop-up box like this. I'm going to call it just parameter. Data type float is fine. And I'm going to set a value of 4. And what this is going to do is it's going to scale the total days by a factor of 4. So it's going to make them less tight overall. I'm going to click OK here. And I'm going to create another parameter. So I'm going to go here, create parameter, and I'm going to call my second parameter inner. And this is specifying where I want it to start. float is also fine. I'm going to have it start at 35. So I'm going to have it start about 35 measures up the from the 0 axis, from the origin. Okay, so I'm going to click OK there, and this is going to affect my X and my Y calculations. So go back to your Calc X and click Edit. And here we are going to add our inner. So we'll add the inner here, and we'll add that to our total days, and then we'll divide by our parameter. And what this has done, it's added like 35 days to, or 35 to this calculation, and it's scaled our total days by a factor of 4. Okay, so we'll click Apply there, click OK. We see it looks a little bit weird here. We need to go and fix our y-axis, so we'll edit our Calc Y. Again, I'm going to add inner plus my total days, and I'll divide my total days by the parameter. All right, click Apply, click OK, and now we see it spread out a little. We see the origin spread out a little bit more, and we can see these data points a little bit more clearly. All right, so now go ahead and remove the axes here, both the X and the Y. You can remove the tick labels. I kind of like the grid look to it. I think it's kind of cool. You are welcome to annotate some of these tweets. Some of them are really interesting, like all of the issues with Kim Jong-un got favorited and retweeted a whole lot, which is really, I think, very interesting. And that's it. So this is your spiral timeline. Congratulations on using a whole lot of trigonometry in order to get a spiral here. Very cool. I've made one more visualization here, just a bar chart, just because I wanted to make the point that when Trump was an Android user, his posts got a whole lot more favorites, as opposed to when he became an iPhone user and they got fewer favorites. I've used these together to create a dashboard and kind of create a vortex for Trump's tweets where we're like spiraling into it, and a little bit of a description over here. I might decide to like call out some interesting tweets or something like that, but I've also included the data source of where all these tweets came from. All right, and that's it. I hope that you've enjoyed all of these tutorials. Good luck making your 3 different kinds of timelines now, and I'll see you in the next class. All right, take care. Bye-bye.